Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds NFL Week 15 preview. I am Geoff Mosher, and we've got a great week of NFL football here. It is week 15, and it got off to a pretty interesting start. Thursday night game where the Rams beat the 49ers 12-6, a big win for the Rams as they keep their pursuit alive for the NFC West title. I said last week that I thought the winner of last week's game between Seattle and Arizona would be in the driver's seat for the NFC West. Seattle, of course, won the game, but you remember I did not fully close the door at all on the Rams, and I even left it slightly ajar for the 49ers, but they had to win that game to convince me that maybe you should give the 49ers the benefit of the doubt, given their coaching staff, their talent, their history. They were clearly just not the team. They're not the team the 49ers have been in the past. Too many injuries, too much turmoil. Saw what happened with Devondre Campbell. I mean, they've been going through whether it's Brandon Ayuk in the offseason. The Super Bowl hangover killed the 49ers. The injuries killed the 49ers. The turmoil killed the 49ers. Will they be back? Probably. But this will not be the year for the 49ers, and you can pretty much count them out of the NFC West, and then not even close for a wild card. The Rams, however, the Rams are now 7-2 in their last 9 games. Their only losses in that time frame are to the Eagles. We all remember that, and the Dolphins. This is a team that I had picked to win the NFC West in my preseason picks. It was on the website, insidethebirds.com. I liked them. I thought the 49ers were not as deep and were going to have a little bit of a Super Bowl hangover going into the year. And I also thought that the division itself had improved. I thought the Cardinals and the Seahawks would be improved, and the Rams, who have a lot of firepower, as you see when you watch them play, whether it's Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, has been unbelievable. And even though Cooper Kupp is really not the player that he was a couple of years ago, he's still on the field, and you still got to make sure that he doesn't do anything against you. I know he didn't do well against the Niners, and he's not that guy. But again, Matthew Stafford playing at a pretty high level. So I thought going into the year, why not? It's hard to repeat as champs. You have new teams in the playoffs each and every year. And I thought the Rams ended last year pretty well, and their discovery of Puka would make them pretty competitive. They got off to a terrible start. They had injuries all over the place. They had Nacua hurt. They had Kupp hurt. They had their offensive line hurt, and that's why they started the year 1-4. But remember what I have said about the Rams for almost all of the season. You can put their coaching staff up with anybody's coaching staff. McVay is that good. He is an incredible coach, and he is coaching his rear end off again this year. And so the Rams cannot be taken lightly. They can still win this division easily. And now they sit back with their extra rest, and they hope that the Packers, the Packers who go to Seattle on, I think that's the Monday night game, they hope that Seattle loses to the Packers, and that would make Seattle 8-6, and it would put the Rams right there in contention to win the NFC West. I mean, they're already in contention, but they're 8-6. Seattle would be 8-6 if Seattle loses to the Packers. And now you got a really interesting race to the end in the NFC West between the Rams and the Seahawks. And honestly, that's two different types of coaches. You got the defensive coach in Seattle. You got the offensive coach, of course, in LA. You got Matthew Stafford, your KG veteran quarterback who's won a Super Bowl, who's having a really good year. I think he's third in the NFL in passing yards. Then you got Geno Smith on the other side with his weapons. Geno's been playing well, and he's got DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And if Seattle loses and both teams are tied at 8-6, you have to like the Rams' schedule against Seattle's schedule. Now, mind you, they'll meet in the season finale, and it could come down to that. In fact, it wouldn't shock me at all if it came down to that. The Rams' last three games are at the Jets. Now they'll get extra rest, but they got to fly across the country. But they should be able to beat the Jets. Then they have to play the Cardinals at home, and then they end the year against the Seahawks. Not a very, very difficult schedule when you compare that to Seattle, which will play after the Packers on this weekend, after they play the Packers, Sunday night game. They will have to play the Vikings the following week. Then they go to the play in Chicago at the Bears, and then they come home at the Rams. So you look at the next 2 weeks after this week and say Rams got Jets, Cardinals. Seattle has Vikings, Bears. So favors the Rams a little bit there. Nobody's a pushover anymore. Obviously, Seattle should be able to beat the Bears, and the Rams should be able to beat the Jets. So then it really comes down to, do the Rams take care of business against a division team against the Cardinals? And can Seattle beat the Vikings, who have been unbelievable this year? So either way, whoever wins the NFC West, and like I said, Seattle is in the driver's seat. I'm not retracting that. They're in the driver's seat. They beat the Cardinals. They are the team to beat. But my preseason pick was the Rams, and we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Still a lot of football left to be played. Either way, whoever wins the division will likely get the number 3 seed, and will probably end up playing an NFC North team. Whoever doesn't win the NFC North, most likely Green Bay or Minnesota, that will probably be the 3-6 matchup. Now the second place NFC North team might get the 5 seed. So I'm saying the third place NFC North team will probably get the 6 seed. Either way, it should be a very good game. It's also possible that whoever doesn't win between the Rams and the Seahawks could miss the playoffs altogether. Or they could, whoever wins, maybe you finish strong, you win 2 out of 3, you just lose the tiebreaker game, and you kick the Commanders out of the 7th seed if the Commanders stumble. The Commanders have the Saints this week. It's in New Orleans. Should be a win. It's never easy to win in New Orleans, but you're the Commanders. You should win. But then the Commanders have to play the Eagles the following week and the Falcons in week 17. And the Falcons are duking it out with the Bucks for the NFC South. And then the Commanders finish up against Dallas, who they lost to a couple of weeks ago in a bizarre game. So could Washington slip and then maybe get one of those second NFC West teams into the wild card game? Possible. That makes the next 3 to 4 weeks really, really fascinating as far as playoff seeding. And the same thing in the AFC. Buffalo took a step back because of their loss to the Rams. They are now 2 games. They go into the weekend 2 games behind the Chiefs, and they've got to play the Lions this week. 2 games behind the Chiefs for the number 1 seed. They have to play the Lions this week. So not easy for Buffalo. They didn't make it easy on themselves, even though Josh Allen had 6 touchdowns in that loss to the Rams, and we'll see if he's got 6 more in him, because he may need all 6 to beat the Lions, maybe even more. But here's the situation. If the Bills lose to the Lions and the Steelers beat the Eagles, the Steelers would leapfrog into the number 2 seed in the AFC, and they have a game left over the final 3 weeks against the Chiefs. So there's a chance, depending on how the Chiefs do, that if the Steelers beat the Eagles and the Bills lose, that the Steelers could still be eyeing away to get the number 1 seed in the AFC, which would be just an absolute tremendous achievement for Mike Tomlin and that franchise. A lot of folks, including myself, thought this was going to be the year that the Steelers finally didn't make the playoffs. Well, not only will they make the playoffs, they may win the division and get the number 1 seed. Mike Tomlin has to be a consideration for Coach of the Year. Remember, it was his decision against some of the people in his own building to go to Russell Wilson, even though they had a winning record with Justin Fields. Remember, Russell Wilson started off the year. He had I think it was a calf injury. He wasn't ready to play. Fields did a better job than most thought. But ever since Russell Wilson has taken over, The Steelers have taken their offense to a higher level. It's not an elite offense by any stretch of the means. Very impressive. They were able to score as many points as they scored last week, despite not against the Browns, despite not having George Pickens. So they continue to do some really impressive things. And they listen. They got the run game. They got the defense. They have a better passing game than they've had in a few years. So the Steelers will be a tough out. And they could lose to the Eagles this weekend by 15 points, and my opinion won't change. Eagles are a really good team too. So, but Pittsburgh is in it, and they've got their eyes on, a potential number one seed if they can beat the Chiefs. Obviously you have to beat the Eagles, or at least if you lose, you got to bounce back and be able to beat the Chiefs when you play them, and hope that the Bills lose a game or two as well. It should be a really fascinating finish to the number one seed in the AFC. I mentioned the Lions. If they lose to the Bills and the Eagles beat the Steelers and the Vikings beat the Bears, that would cause a three-way tie for the number one seed in the NFC between the Lions, Vikings, and Eagles. However, I believe the Lions would own the tiebreaker over both teams. They'd own a better conference record over the Eagles. There's no head-to-head with the Eagles. They don't play the Eagles this year. And they'd have a better division or head-to-head record against the Vikings because they've already beaten the Vikings once. Now, again, things can change and they have to end the year against the Vikings, but that would just be the case, and it would make the NFC race fascinating as well for that number one seed. And it would also put pressure on the Lions. If the Lions lose, it would put pressure on them to go undefeated over the final 3 weeks. Bears, Niners, Vikings are their last three opponents. First two on the road, and then they end the season against the Vikings at home. Now, if the Lions beat the Bills with all the injuries that they've had and with everything they've had to overcome, that would be an impressive feat. And I wouldn't blame the Eagles or Vikings for feeling like it's a fait accompli that the Lions are going to get the number one seed in the NFC, even with 3 weeks left after this week in the regular season. Some of the 1 o'clock games just don't offer much. Some you've got teams going somewhere versus teams not going anywhere. You have the Chiefs at the Browns. The Chiefs are 4-point favorites. The Browns can try to play spoiler. It didn't really work for them last week against Steelers. Chiefs do what they always do. They win a one-possession game, that was seemingly touched by the football gods as their backup kicker doinks it off the upright, but in as they beat the Chargers 19-17, and it makes it 9 straight AFC West titles for the Kansas City Chiefs. They've become the new Patriots. Now, they don't have 7 rings because they're still a little early into the Mahomes era. Remember, it's not 9 straight titles by Mahomes because Alex Smith was the first guy to start winning a few division titles for the Chiefs. But since Mahomes has taken over, since they've won 3 Super Bowls, they feel, especially the way they just win week after week after week, these close games. I believe they've now set a record for one-possession wins in a year. Feels like all of their wins are one-possession wins. They live on the edge each and every week, and they do it better than everyone else. And people say, well, why don't the Chiefs get criticized for their lucky one-possession wins compared to the Eagles or other teams who get, ripped for it when they only win by? Because the Chiefs have 3 Super Bowls. And by the way, if you ask me personally right now who I think should be the favorite to win the Super Bowl, I wouldn't say the Chiefs. I would say the Lions would be the favorite to win the Super Bowl. And it would not surprise me if the Chiefs, who live on the edge week after week, get picked off and clipped before they get to even the AFC Championship game or the Super Bowl. It wouldn't surprise me if they won it all either. I'm just saying, I don't exercise blind faith in the Chiefs to just automatically win another Lombardi. But you have to give them the benefit of the doubt because of their track record and their history. Who likes to bet against Patrick Mahomes? Not me. So that's why they're judged differently, because they've got the receipts. Other teams don't have the receipts like the Kansas City Chiefs. Will the Browns make it tough on them? Maybe. We'll see. I just don't know if they can hang. This is a weird game where I could see it being airtight because it's a Chiefs game, but I can also finally see the Chiefs kind of getting their act together and getting themselves a double-digit win for the first time in quite a while. The Bengals are at the Titans. Bengals are 5-point favorites. Technically they have not been eliminated, so they're going to play hard. They played hard against Dallas. Probably should have lost. Dallas muffs a punt at the end of the game, works in Cincinnati's favor. Then the Bengals go and do what they do. Joe Burrow gets a second chance. You give him the ball, you give him Jamar Chase, you give him T. Higgins. Next thing you know, they're in the end zone. It has been, I don't know that I've ever seen a year for a quarterback and a wide receiver like I've seen for Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase for a losing team. For a team that's not even close to having a 500 record, if we're being honest. What are the Bengals? The Bengals are 5-8. And yet you could argue that statistically Burrow should be an MVP candidate. Jamar Chase should be an MVP candidate. They're getting a fantastic year out of Chase Brown in his second year as a running back. They can't stop anybody. They have to win games because the other team falls all over itself, like the Dallas Cowboys did. But if they ever get their act together defensively, and I don't know if they're going to re-sign T. Higgins. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case. So maybe they can use a draft pick that they get this year, a high one on another wide receiver. But if they can get back to being just decent defensively like they were a couple of years ago, a healthy Burrow and a healthy Jamar Chase, and maybe if that offensive line gets a little better, could be a really dangerous team. That's why a lot of people, including myself, thought the Bengals were going to be really good this year. Oddly enough, we had the right reasons. We thought Burrow was going to come back and take the NFL by storm, and he has. And he has. Joe Burrow has been incredible this year, but they don't win. They're not winning. Their defense is terrible. I mean, awful. Unlike anything I've ever seen. So that's that game. The Titans are going nowhere. I don't think they have the firepower to hang with the Bengals, and they're just not as good defensively nowadays as they were earlier in the year, where they can give a team a couple of fits. So I would look for the Bengals to come out on top, especially since they are not yet mathematically eliminated. The Commanders are at the Saints. They're 7-point favorites. It's hard to be a 7-point favorite going to the Superdome. I know the Saints are bad, or not great, I should say. They've gotten better since Darren Rizzi took over. Now they've won 3 of 4, but they just barely beat the Giants, which is no great accomplishment. And it looks like they'll be starting Jake Haener at quarterback. So I'm assuming that's going to be a real mess for the Saints. The Commanders are a little beat up too. They don't have Eckler, but obviously the Commanders can score points in a hurry. They can be a prolific offensive team, and even if they're playing a decent defense, I think that they're going to be at least good for 24 to 28 points, even at the Superdome. They're coming off a bye, got a little healthier. They have the Eagles up next week, so for them, you don't want them looking too far ahead. But the fact that Jake Haener has to start for the Saints, and you saw the Washington get its act together, score 42 points against the Titans. They had scored 34 I'm sorry, 26 in their loss against the Cowboys. So offensively, it seems like they've got their act together after a little bit of a funk there, and they really should roll against the Saints. Speaking of rolling, the Ravens come out of the bye. They're 15-point favorites against the Giants. Giants were bad. Now they've been decimated by injuries. I think Tyler Nubin's out, Lawrence out. There's just, look, the Giants are just trying to get the number one pick. So the Ravens should roll. And if the Eagles, they'll be rooting for the Eagles this week. If the Eagles can beat the Steelers, the Ravens get right back into the NFC North race, and then they have the Steelers up next the following week. So they'll have their eye on the Eagles Steelers game, and then they'll see what they can do against the Steelers, and that game's in Baltimore. So that'll be kind of fascinating if the Steelers lose to the Eagles and the Ravens beat the Giants. The following week becomes a really, really interesting AFC North game between the Steelers and the Ravens. Cowboys at Panthers. Now, this is incredible. The Panthers who have lost four straight games, are 2.5 point favorites. They're at home, 2.5 point favorites. They are a 3-10 team that has lost four straight games that is 2.5 point favorites over a Cowboys team that has won two out of the last three. Yes, they lost in a humiliating fashion at home against the Bengals. They still won two out of their last three games. They still have more wins. They have 5 wins. The Panthers have three. So they've got more wins than the Panthers. And they've won two out of three, and yet they are underdogs to a 3-10 team that has lost four games in a row. Listen, there's a reason for that. You've seen the Panthers. They've played four good games in a row. Okay. The Panthers have gotten their act together. They are much more competitive. It's not their fault that I'm sorry, I've said they've lost four games in a row. They've lost three games in a row. It's not their fault. They played three teams that are all going to be in the playoffs: the Chiefs, the Bucks, and the Eagles. Yeah, I do think the Tampa Bay Bucks are going to make the playoffs. I think they're going to win that division. So I understand why the Panthers are favorites. I just, if you're putting money on this game, good luck to you, because I can't trust that the Panthers are going to win, cover, any of that. I could see the Cowboys going in there and beating Carolina. Carolina still has to learn how to win. Obviously, they blew a golden opportunity to upset the Eagles when Xavier Legette dropped that ball on the final drive in the fourth quarter. Jets at Jags. Jets 3.5 point favorites. Why bother? I mean, both teams are, as I record this, both teams are getting their search firms in order, trying to find their next regime and head coach. Neither of these teams seems to understand the landscape of the NFL and who the better coaches are out there to hire. One team needs a firm to go get names. I mean, there's really nothing to say about that game. Dolphins at Texans. Texans are 3 point favorites. Hey, it's a fun game, but there's not that much at stake. Miami is technically still alive, but honestly, they need a miracle to get into a wild card berth. But they'll play hard because they're still alive. They're still trying to show that they're a good team that had their season derailed, obviously, when they lost Tua for several weeks there. They've won four out of the last 5 games. They've beaten the Rams. That's probably really their only, win that they can brag about. But they have won 4 out of 5. And like I said, they are technically not eliminated yet. At 6-7, they and the Colts are 2 games behind Denver at 8-5. But they would need some help. They'd have to really go on a big run here. The Dolphins would, and get some help if they're going to make into the playoffs. And beating the Texans in Houston won't be easy. And then after that, they've got the 49ers, then at Browns, at Jets. Not the toughest schedule in the world, especially if they can figure out a way to beat the Texans. But I don't really see it happening for the Dolphins. But they will play hard. They'll play hard. They can't run the ball, which is amazing. A-Chain can catch the ball. He can get you 7, 8, 9 catches for 50, 60, 70 yards. But lately they've been trying to run him in the absence of having Mostert, and there's just nowhere to go. This is a team that needs its running backs to set up its passing game. It needs its running game. It's always been built that way since Mike McDaniel has run that offense. Their stretch run, their outside zone run has been their bread and butter, and it just hasn't happened for them this year. And I attribute that largely to their offensive line. That's really the area that they need to shore up this offseason. They need to protect Tua, and they need to absolutely be able to run the ball again to be competitive. They can be right back up there in the AFC if they can get themselves some pretty good offensive linemen, because I don't think they're that far away from a talent standpoint. The Texans are going to get they're all but secured to win the AFC South, but they have not been an impressive team this year. And I've said for a couple of weeks, it wouldn't surprise me, if they get the 3 or 4 seed, if they lose in the first round to the 6 or the 5, depending on how it shapes up. 4 o'clock games, you got Colts at Broncos. It's a big game. because the Colts are 2 games behind the Broncos for the 7th seed right now, and they're also still technically have a chance to knock off the Texans there, I believe, to win the AFC South. Both are to me seem very unlikely. But if the Colts beat the Broncos in this game, they close the gap against Denver to 1 game for a wild card seed. They are coming out of the bye on a 3 game. The Broncos are coming out of the bye on a 3 game win streak. They've responded really nicely after losing on a blocked field goal to the Chiefs 4 weeks ago. They do have a tough schedule to finish out as they try to hold on to that wild card seed because after the Colts, they'll go play at the Chargers, at the Bengals, and then a home game against the Chiefs. It's not easy right there if you're the Denver Broncos. So you know you've got to bring it each and every week. You still know you're on a rookie quarterback who's playing more games now than he ever played in any season in college. Maybe going into week 18, if the Chiefs have already locked up the number 1 seed, then they'll take it easy and the Broncos won't be under as much pressure. But until we get to there, we don't know what's going on. So the Broncos have to continue to win games. At least I know what I'm getting with the Broncos. At least I know who I think they are. A really solid defensive team. Sometimes they've had a few lapses over the last few weeks, but they're a very solid defensive team with an offense that can be sporadic. The quarterback can make some plays. He can also be very up and down. The running game is like, it's like a different person each week. It could be Estime one week. It could be Javonte Williams another. It could be McLaughlin another. You just never know who's going to be carrying the ball for the Broncos on a weekly basis. I don't know if that's intentional to fool the defense or if Sean Payton is just really impatient and doesn't have a guy that he really likes, so he tries to ride the hot hand. I don't know, but it's worked for them. They've won games, and right now they're in position to make the playoffs, whereas the Colts, I don't know who they are. Has Anthony Richardson played better over the last 3 weeks? Yes. They've won 2 out of the last 3, I believe. The Colts have won 2 out of their last 3. So they're a team that you can't take lightly. Yeah, they've beaten the Jets and Patriots. They lost big to the Lions. So we'll see. The Colts will be motivated because they know they need to win this game, and they know that if they do, they bridge a gap down to 1 game, and the light is still on for them. I just don't know if that Richardson can perform against this Broncos defense. Bills at Lions, we talked about. It's going to be a great one. You can't underestimate how big of a win it was for the Lions last Thursday night over the Packers. That was huge. Think about the Lions have 18 players on injured reserve. And now it's a very good Packers team they played. And obviously they go for on 4th down. They get the big conversion. Goff, stumbling but handing the ball off. And it was a great win for them. They had 8 players. They had almost every starter in the front 6, front 7 out going into the game. And then they lost their last really good starter and good player, Aleem McNeil, to a concussion. We'll see if he can make it back for this game against the Bills. They're getting a little bit healthier. I know their left tackle also missed that game against the Packers. He might be able to play against the Bills. They're going to need it. But I keep saying, how much can they lose and still win games? And they keep winning games against good teams. I mean, the Lions have a very good resume of wins. It's not like they've gotten fat on beating crappy teams week after week after week. And here they have to play the Bills. So the Lions are showing you how tough they are. I mean, they've beaten the Rams. They've beaten the Vikings. They've beaten the Packers twice. They've beaten the Texans. All right. They've beaten the Colts, who are not a great team, but still technically in it for the playoffs. It's not, of course they have a couple of games. They've beaten the Seahawks, who are leading the NFC West. So there's nothing left for the Lions to prove except going and delivering this team's first Super Bowl title. And I keep saying it, but this Lions team reminds me of the 2017 Eagles. They lose players to injury, but they keep going. They're just talented on both sides of the ball. They're talented in the trenches. Their quarterback is playing at a high level. Their defense has overcome what it's lost from injuries and still plays at a fairly high level. They seem like a team of destiny. I think the Lions are the best team in football. Not the best 53, but that doesn't matter. Best team in football. By the way, they're not the worst 53. It's not like they're that Dan Campbell is making the most of nothing. They've lost a lot of players. They are a very talented team, though. I just don't know if their 53 is as talented as even the Eagles or trying to think of another team that might have an equivalent. Maybe the Bills, we'll see. But maybe the Chiefs, who knows? There's a lot of talent on all these top four teams, but they continue to get it done. And I think that they are on a magic carpet ride right now. And it's going to take an amazing game. If the Bills are going to beat them, which I think the Bills can, because as everybody knows, my favorite expression, when you're on a long win streak like the Lions are, and we're at 11 straight wins here, you're closer to your next loss. It's just the reality of the situation. Not going to win 100 games in a row. Probably not going to win 25 games in a row. They've won 11 games in a row. At some point, they are going to lose a game. I have no idea when that will be. Some might argue that it might be good for the Lions to lose a non-conference game here against the Bills. To get, if you're a real like law of averages type guy or analytics type guy, you might say it'd be good for them to lose this game against the Bills. And then, you kind of pick up the pieces, then you start a new streak and move on. Kind of like when the Eagles lost in 2017, they had a long winning streak. They went out to Seattle, they lost, the sky was falling, and then they didn't lose again, right? Or maybe at the end of the year they did. I can't even remember anymore. I think they did at the end of the year because they didn't play starters. But the point was they won every meaningful game that they needed to play and then finally won the Super Bowl there. So that's Bills Lions. You got Steelers Eagles. Eagles are 5-point favorites. A little surprised that it's 5, but I get it. They are much more talented. They are a more talented team than the Steelers. I do think the Eagles will have to throw the ball a little more and get that pass game going to beat the Steelers. I also think that the Eagles respond well when it feels like the walls are caving in on them. And certainly this week might have had that feel for them with all the drama that came out from Brandon Graham and A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts that, continue to permeate throughout the week. I thought the team handled it really well, stifled it pretty easily, got back to focusing on practice and the game, but doesn't drown the reality that the Eagles have not thrown the ball very well for the last few weeks, but they still have won. So this should be a really good game. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, there's a lot at stake for both teams when it comes to seeding. Patriots at Cardinals as we start the 4:00 games. Now the Cardinals have to win or else they're going to fall out of it. Then you can just close the door on them like the 49ers for the NFC West and then the playoffs. They've lost 3 straight games. They fall to 6-8. It's really hard to see them winning the West. And that's their only shot to make the playoffs is winning the NFC West. I think Kyler Murray, who had a really nice stretch of football during the middle of the year, has to pick it up. How about getting Trey McBride a touchdown? This guy probably gets more targets than anybody else in the league, and pretty sure he doesn't have a touchdown yet, despite how good he has been for that offense. If you're Drew Petzing and you're the offensive coordinator, can't you figure out a way to get, maybe your best weapon? I know Marvin Harrison Jr. is a really good weapon too as a rookie, but get the guy this ball when you're in the red zone. So we'll see what happens there. The Patriots have played teams tougher. They're not going to roll over because Jared Mayo is a first-year head coach and he's trying to win as many games as possible. And because they know Drake May, they've seen really good things from Drake May. I think they're encouraged by Drake May. They should be encouraged by Drake May. He makes some really good throws. He makes some good athletic movement, second reaction plays each game. So you're obviously not going to be using a first-round pick this year if you're the Patriots on a quarterback. So why not go out there, try to win as many games as you can? Your first-round pick will probably be on somebody in the trenches, and there'll always be 5 or 6 guys to choose from when that's where you want to go. So listen, I don't expect them to roll over and just give the Cardinals the game. I could see the Patriots winning. The Cardinals, though, they have to win. If they want to be NFC West champs and stay in this race and compete up there with the Rams and the Seahawks, they cannot lose this game. Bucks at Chargers, speaking of, two teams that really can't afford too much slippage. You've got a great offensive team against a great defensive team. The Bucks are 7-6. And everything I have said about the NFC South now going back, I want to six weeks when the Falcons were in the lead and the Bucks were losing to Kansas City and they were losing to Baltimore and they were in the throes of a really difficult part of their schedule. But the Falcons themselves weren't winning in droves and they were looking vulnerable. Everything I said was, if you fast forward 6 or 7 weeks, don't be surprised if the Bucks overtake the Falcons. And now they have. The Falcons have played terribly. The Bucks came back out of the bye and have done the job, done what they were supposed to do. Doesn't always look pretty in their wins, but they have done what they need to do and now lead that division by one game. And that's really important. They cannot be tied. This is why they can't afford any slippage because they've already lost to the Falcons twice this year. So the Falcons would own the head to head. And this week is not great theoretically for the Bucks because, after winning 3 straight games, they play the Chargers, who are a really good team. Now you're on the road at the Chargers. Meanwhile, the Falcons play the Raiders. So there's an opportunity here if the Bucks don't win and beat the Chargers and the Falcons beat the Raiders that you get a tie with a few weeks left and the Falcons owning the tiebreaker. So the Bucks cannot afford to slip. They have to play well. They are playing well. They've won 3 in a row. They've managed without Chris Godwin. You've seen guys like McMillan step up. You've seen guys like Sean Tucker or Rashad White or the other Bucky Irving. They've had to deal with some injuries there, but they've been able to move the ball. And Baker Mayfield has had a really nice year. Liam Cohen will probably, their offensive coordinator, will probably get some head coaching looks or at least some chatter, some interviews in the offseason. He's done an excellent job, but this is a tough game because the Chargers are very good defensively. They don't score any points. Chargers don't score any points, and that's why they couldn't beat the Chiefs last week. It also doesn't help that they're not a very weapon-laden team, and they didn't have Ladd McConkey. So we'll see if Ladd gets on the field in this game. If not, I kind of like the Bucks' chances to win that game. Bucks don't play great defense though. So, and Justin Herbert, when he's up against a team that doesn't play great defense, he's a little bit better, obviously. Justin Herbert has been asked to do a whole lot with not much, but he does have a very good offensive line. So that's why the Chargers have been able to run the ball. It's why they've been able to have a decent passing game and good enough for them to be the current number 6 seed as it stands right now. I think the Chargers will make the playoffs. Even if they lose this game, I think they're going to get to 10. No sure thing. But I think they'll get to 10 wins and make the playoffs. But obviously a lot on the line for the Bucks. Packers at Seahawks. Packers are 3-point favorites. Really big game for both teams, as we discussed. It's been interesting to see the Packers, and they're a very good team. And their only losses this year are to the Eagles, the Vikings, and they've lost twice to the Lions. So that's 3 double-digit win teams that the Packers have lost to. And I think 3 of those 4 games have all been by 1 possession. In fact, they've lost all 4 games by a total of 20 points. That's an average of 5 points per loss. The Packers are a very good team that sort of struggles to make that one big play they need to make against these really big teams to win the game. I mean, that goes back to the season opener against the Eagles. Remember everybody was slipping on the field, but there was a drop pass in the end zone. I can't remember who it was, maybe Dobbs, maybe Watson. There are a couple of drop passes in the middle of the field. The Packers got to figure out a way to get Jaden Reed back into the offense. He's their slot receiver, but they've been running the ball and they've been playing 12 personnel. So sometimes you'll see games where Reed isn't on the field as much, but he's a playmaker. And Matt LaFleur is an elite play caller. And I'm really not knocking them because they've had a very good year and they're a good team. And at 9-4, they can easily if they beat the Seattle team. I mean, they can still overtake Minnesota to get to a higher seed and get to second in the NFC North. And I think there'll be a really tough out in the playoffs for whoever they have to play. I just think when you compare them to, of course, the Lions and even the Vikings, there seems to be just something a little missing at times, which is why I don't think they make that one play sometimes they need against these elite teams that they are playing to be the difference. But you can't knock what they've done with Josh Jacobs. He's been a great addition for them. Not obviously not like Saquon Barkley to the Eagles, but he's been very, very vital to what they do offensively. He's got a ton of touchdowns, got a lot of rushing yards, and and obviously their pickup of Xavier McKinney has done a lot for their defense. Xavier's had a really good year on defense. But again, I think sometimes you watch a Packers game and you think a little bit vulnerable compared to some of the other uh, Super Bowl contenders or real upper echelon playoff teams. Seahawks, look, we laid it out with you, them and the Rams. If they can beat the Packers, that will go a long way. If they can beat the Packers, you'll probably feel pretty good about their chances to stave off the Rams and win the NFC West. They are getting good football out of Geno Smith. I don't know how many people get to see the Seahawks play. I watch them when I can. I've watched a little bit of their tape this year when I've been able to. Geno's a good quarterback. He's not afraid to make some really difficult throws. He is a fearless quarterback. He has some second reaction movement, but that's really not his game. His game is getting the ball to Jackson Smith Najigba, who has done an unbelievable job in year two of becoming a good possession receiver for them. And he will get the ball to DK Metcalf. They'll run it with either Charbonnet or Kenneth Walker. They can do some good things offensively. It feels like in their first year of the Ryan Grubb offense that they've improved. Ryan Grubb, of course, was the University of Washington's offensive coordinator last year. Tried to come here in the NFL and bring a little bit more of a downfield element to the Seahawks passing game. And you're starting to see that. And Geno's doing a really nice job. Defense is coming along under Mike McDonald. They haven't allowed more than 21 points in their last four games, which you would expect under Mike McDonald that they would. They started off a little slow, but they're starting to come together. I think this Packers Seahawks game will be a really, really good game. If you ask me who I think the better team is, I would say the Packers. It's in Seattle. Packers are 3-point favorites for a reason. I think that shows you that people have more faith in the Packers than the Seahawks, but I think it'll be a good game, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Seahawks won the game. All right, we got two. That is the Sunday night game, I should have mentioned. You got two Monday night football games, Bears at Vikings. I think I said it last week. I'm going to continue to say it. At some point, we got to stop doing the but Sam Darnold thing when it comes to the Minnesota Vikings. I think that would have happened already. At some point, they were 5-0. Then they lost two straight games, right? They lost to the Lions, they lost to the Rams. So they went into week 9 and everybody was starting to be like, Sam Darnold turned the ball over. Cinderella's chariot turning back into a pumpkin. Then in week 9, they beat the Colts 21-13. Then they beat the Jaguars 12-7. They were kind of fortunate to win that Jags game. So there they were. They were sitting at 7-2, and people were like, but Sam Darnold. Well, since then, they've been pretty convincing. They beat the Titans by double digits. They squeezed out a win against the Bears. They did score 30 points in that game, though. So that wasn't a Sam Darnold thing. And division games are always going to be like that. Beat the Cardinals 23-22 at a time in which the Cardinals were playing all right. And then obviously they just stomped all over the Atlanta Falcons 42-21. And Sam Darnold had himself a really nice ball game there with 5 touchdowns, 347 yards, and no interceptions. So they are 11-2 here. And I think it's fair to say, listen, if you're the type of person that says, okay, but I don't think they're going to win the Super Bowl or get to the NFC Championship game because of Sam Darnold, I get it. I'm with you. But if you're expecting them to lose 3 out of 4 down the stretch here, or if you think in the first round they're going to lose by 20 because Sam Darnold's going to go throw three or 4 picks, I will remind you, that Kevin O'Connell has done an amazing job coaching Sam Darnold this year. I will remind you that Brian Flores has done an equally amazing job with that defense. And I will remind you that Sam Darnold has Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, who in year 2 is really coming into his own, and he's got TJ Hawkinson back. and they're running the ball fairly well. This isn't a Sam Darnold has to play like Tom Brady to win organization. And I think that they can be a dangerous team in the playoffs. I don't think they're like the Falcons team from a couple of years ago with Kirk Cousins that lost to the Giants in the first round, that literally won every week by a field goal, kind of like the way Kansas City is winning now. That team lived on the edge all year long, and it caught up to them in the playoffs when they lost to Daniel Jones and the Giants. I don't think that this team is similar. I think this team is a lot more talented. They got playmakers on both offense and defense. They should take care of the Bears. But again, division games always a little weird. And that leaves us with the second Monday night game. The Falcons are 4-point favorites on the road against the Raiders. The Falcons are 4-point favorites, despite the fact that Kirk Cousins hasn't thrown a touchdown since November 3rd. Can I repeat that? Kirk Cousins has not thrown a touchdown since November 3rd. That is more than a month, a long time more than a month. It is 5 games ago. How much money did they sign this guy for in the offseason? They have not won their last 4 games, which is hard to do when your quarterback doesn't throw a touchdown. And he has been picked off 8 times in the last 4 games. So do the math. 4 straight losses. At one point, the Falcons were 6-3 and had a 2-game lead on the Tampa Bay Bucks in the NFC South. But I told you this thing could go off the rails for them. I didn't like how they were playing in the middle of the year, even in some of their wins, right? And it went off the rails. I don't think Kirk Cousins can move like he used to. Not that he was ever a guy who was a great athlete or making second reaction plays here and there, but he really looks like the Achilles injury that he had last year has taken a toll on him as the year has gone on. They're not out of it. Can they turn things around and beat the Raiders? Maybe. Sure. The team has said it is not going to play Michael Penix, that is going to stick with Kirk Cousins. I just don't know. If you're losing at halftime of the Raiders, if you still haven't gotten a touchdown from your quarterback, if he turns the ball over 1 or 2 times, and yes, I know I said this last week too. I said this exact same thing about their game against the Vikings. If you're down big or you're just offensively defunct at halftime, how do you not go to Michael Penix? Because at that point, what do you have to lose? The division is slipping away. You're not going to make the playoffs if you don't win the division. And Michael Penix is going to probably be your guy next year anyway if this continues to happen anyway. So what's the point? Well, why don't you try to save your season? See if something would work. I don't know. The Falcons really need to win this game. And the Raiders are not going to lay down. I do think the Raiders like playing for Antonio Pierce. They're probably going to have a new head coach next year. They don't. There are some games where they've lost by double digits, but I feel like in the few times I've seen the Raiders, they've at least tried to be competitive. I know earlier in the year, they overcame a 10-point deficit and beat Baltimore in Baltimore. So, they've obviously had a lot of injuries. They were hanging with Tampa Bay for a little bit, and then Tampa Bay pulled away. But they lost to the Chiefs by 2 weeks before that. Broncos by 10. They have some games. Both times they've played the Chiefs, they've lost by 1 possession. They lost to the Rams by 5. They're a hard team to get a beat on. I think they're going to play hard in this game. And I think that the Raiders are going to sense that the Falcons come in here really limping and not aren't very good. And maybe try to play spoiler here. So should be an interesting game. But obviously the Falcons got to win. The Falcons lose the game, they're done. I'll think they're especially if the Bucks win. Bucks beat the Chargers, Falcons lose to the Raiders. Folks, it's over. May not be technically over, but it'll be over. All right. My 3 picks against the spread. Now, it was not a great week for me last week. I went 0-3. I had the Dolphins covering 6.5 against the Jets. They were favored by 6.5. They didn't. They won by 6. I took the Bills over the Rams. The Bills lost. And I took Dallas getting 5.5 against the Bengals, but they lost by 7. So my overall record fell to 22 and 20. It's kind of funny. I've had three really bad weeks this year. Week one and week two. And then this past week, week 14, I was 0 and 3. So that made me 0 and 9 in those 3 weeks. In the 13 other weeks, I'm 22 and 11. But hey, like Bill Parcells says, you are what your record says you are. So that's my record, 22 and 20, and I'll try to do better this week. I got the Broncos this week. They are 4-point favorites over the Colts. Listen, I just don't know what Colts team is going to show up. So I said I wouldn't shock me if the Colts won the game, but I do think in Denver, everything the Broncos have to play for, 4 point, they got to win by a touchdown. I think they can do that. I can see them forcing a bunch of turnovers. Vikings -7 at home against the Bears. Look, the Vikings needed a win, and the Bears are out of it. So that's what you look for at this time of year. A team that has a lot to play for against a team that has very little to play for other than pride. And even though it's an NFC North game, and the last time they played it was close, I think the Vikings are smelling blood and playing some really good football. So I'm taking them with the 7 points that they're giving to the Bears. And then I'm going to take the Chiefs -4 in Cleveland against the Brown. Like I said, the Chiefs are either going to lose this game or they're going to win it by 15 or 16. I don't think that there's going to be another one of these like last 3-point wins and on a last field goal, or Patrick Mahomes going to run, scramble 25 yards for a touchdown in a tie game in overtime and win. I know. I think the Chiefs are either going to win big or lose. So that's how it goes. So those are my three picks. Broncos -4, Chiefs -7, Chiefs -4 in this week against the spread. And lastly, I'll end it with this. The biggest NFL news story this week wasn't really about an NFL team. It was Bill Belichick deciding that he's not even going to try to get another NFL job. And maybe that was already decided for him. And he was going to go coach the University of North Carolina. Really interesting decision, especially for Bill at the age that he has. It sort of would indicate that he just really has a passion for coaching and doesn't have any plans to go back to the NFL. Because if you're pledging your allegiance to North Carolina, what are you going to have a good year at North Carolina? And then you think the NFL doors are going to open back to you in the cycle? No, I mean, the NFL coaching hiring is typically getting younger and younger and more player coach, player connection, more offense. So I think Bill Belichick is reading the writing on the wall here and saying, if I'm not getting the job this year, then I'm probably not getting a job next year. And if that's the case, and I'm not getting any younger, and I really want to coach, I go where I can go. And North Carolina was willing to give him a job. Now, will Bill Belichick win at North Carolina? I think he will make them and listen, it's not like North Carolina was terrible under Mac Brown, but I think Bill Belichick will give North Carolina a little bit of, a little bit of street cred in the ACC there. I mean, people, I think, will want to play, especially defensive players, will want to play for Bill Belichick. So I can see Bill Belichick with his coaching acumen, with the staff that he's going to put together. He's going to retain Freddie Kitchens, who he has a history with, and with his ability to probably get some recruits who are going to want to say, yeah, I'll play for Bill Belichick. I think that he can make North Carolina competitive in the ACC, interesting in the ACC. But I've heard some people, I've heard a couple of different comparisons, right? Deion Sanders comparison. Deion's young. Deion got the #1 recruit in the country, Travis Hunter, to go play for him at Jacksonville State. Okay. And then he got Travis to go transfer with him to Colorado. Jacksonville State, no, a lot of people haven't even heard of, right? And Colorado was a team that had won 3 games, I think, the year before Deion took over, maybe even fewer. I mean, that was a major, major rebuild. North Carolina is not in shambles. What Deion Sanders did was nothing short of miraculous. I don't expect a ton of blue chip players, #1 player, the kind of guys who go to Ohio State, who go to Texas, who go to Georgia. I don't expect a rash of players who go to those teams to all of a sudden say, I'm going to go to North Carolina. I do expect some four-star recruits, maybe an occasional five-star who would have gone to one of those schools to make, especially if it's a corner or a safety. That's really Belichick's wheelhouse, right? I could see that happening to go to North Carolina where one or two players, I could see the recruiting class getting better, but I don't. I think we have to stop short of the Deion Sanders comparisons. It's a little bit not. It's very much not apples to apples. I don't think that North Carolina will suddenly become a championship caliber team because Bill Belichick is coaching. The other comparison you've heard is sort of a Jim Harbaugh like comparison, where the name is going to bring people into the program. I think where the comparison might be fair is that Michigan team Harbaugh just won with last year, that he built up gradually. They were a very well coached team, but they were not. They had NFL talent, of course. Blake Corum, defensive linemen. They had some receivers. Roman Wilson, but they were not as good of a roster as far as blue chip talent as even Ohio State, probably as Georgia, right? They won because they were a badass, trench driven team that was really well coached by not only Harbaugh, by Jesse Minter, and they were disciplined and they wore you down. That's how Michigan won. And credit them for doing that. I mean, it was a great accomplishment. And there's a rich history of football at Michigan that Jim Harbaugh was hired to restore and did. Again, North Carolina, Michigan's a football school with a basketball program that has been at times very good, but has some lore to it, but is not considered a blue blood. It's not Kansas, not UConn, it's not North Carolina, it's not Duke, right? Michigan's had some teams in the late 60s and early 70s. They obviously had the 89 team that won it all. That was their only championship. Ramil Robinson over Seton Hall, the free throws and overtime. Those of my age and older might remember it. Glenn Rice, right? And then they had the Fab Five, of course, and then the Jim Boeheim teams. So throughout their history, Michigan has had some really good basketball, but they're not known as a basketball school. They're a football school. They're not a basketball blue blood. All right. North Carolina is a blue blood basketball school. They're a basketball school. They've had some good college football teams before, and they've put guys in the NFL. We know Lawrence Taylor went to North Carolina, Vonnie Holiday, the quarterbacks recently, Sam Howell, Drake May, who I talked about. All right, so there's an ability to win games at North Carolina. I stopped short of this Harbaugh comparison to where I think Bill Belichick is going to take North Carolina and win a championship with them by winning with less is more kind of talent, or having a less that is more kind of roster, or doing more with less is what I should say. I don't think that that's going to be the case. I could be wrong. And certainly the ACC can be a winnable conference. You got to beat Florida. You got Clemson, you got Florida State. Those programs can be up and down. I mean, Clemson's done a nice job, and then Syracuse and all that. So yeah, North Carolina can get some talent in there, and Bill can do more with less and win the ACC. I don't see them being able to, in 3 to 5 years, be able to rub elbows with Texas or Georgia or Ohio State or whoever is going to be among the top programs there. I think that's a tall order. And each year that goes, as he's building up the program, Bill Belichick himself is going to get a year older. So while I think it's a good move for the program, and I think that they can win some games, I'm going to stop short of making any sort of Jim Harbaugh, Michigan comparisons. That is not North Carolina's history, and I don't think it's going to be with Bill Belichick as their head coach. Better, yes. Championship, no. And then the second thing I would say is I would wonder, and I'm sure Bill had to have, and the school have had to have these conversations, but when you're the head coach of a college football team, your personality is important, how you are with the donors, how you are with the boosters to get your NIL program built up. You have to be the face of the college. You have to go and present yourself. Nick Saban would show up at the Senior Bowl. I remember in Alabama, and he'd be wearing the alligator boots and the crimson sports jacket, and he would just ooze Alabama, right? That's where you have to be when you want to be a top college football coach. All right. Um, can Bill Belichick do that all the time, year after year? Can he sit in the house of a recruit and, eat the family meal and schmooze and make himself relatable? I mean, I don't know. Listen, I can't sit here and tell you no. He can certainly surprise us all. And maybe there's a side to Bill Belichick that people are going to love and cling to right away that maybe we don't get to see. I'm sure there is, by the way. I'm sure he's got more personality than he lets on when he's saying on to Cincinnati, you know. And as I said in the podcast, I can't wait and, when he's coaching next year and they lose a tough game to Miami or Syracuse or whatever, and then they got one of those cupcakes up next week, and he just says in the microphone, and I'm on to Coastal Carolina. And, I'm looking forward to that. But I do wonder if Bill can embrace that side of being the top dog at being the head coach of a college football team, because it's about so much more than your X's and O's. It's about so much more than your players. It's about how you get those players, how you keep those players, the transfer portal, NIL. I mean, I know Bill had to reconcile all of this before taking the job, but that doesn't mean that when you're in the heat of it and you're doing the job that you're going to like it, be good at it, embrace it, accept it. And, Bill, I can see being just arrogant enough to say, you know what? I don't care if I'm not good at that stuff. I'm just going to win on my X's and O's. And unfortunately, in college, that doesn't always work. It doesn't. You got to really be, you got to get the players, and you have to be the face of the college. So that'll be a really big challenge for Bill Belichick taking over as North Carolina head coach. But you know what? It's exciting for all of us, right? It's exciting for us in the media to watch it. I'm sure it's exciting for the fan base, and it should make North Carolina a little more interesting in making headlines for their football team as opposed to their basketball team. All right, that's going to do it for this NFL Week 15 preview on Inside the Birds. Everybody enjoy your football watching.